It's Patrick Hutzel from IntensiveCareHotline.com, where we instantly improve the lives for families of critically ill patients in intensive care so that you can make informed decisions, get peace of mind, real power, real control, and so that you can influence decision making fast, even if you're not a doctor or a nurse in intensive care. This is another episode of Your Questions Answered, and in last week's episode I answered another question from one of our readers, and the question last week was part 6 of my husband had open heart surgery with complications. He's not waking up, he needs 100% of oxygen, and now he's bleeding from the stomach. I'm so scared. Help. You can check out last week's episode by clicking on the link below this video. In this week's episode of Your Questions Answered, I want to answer another frequently asked question from our readers. And the question this week is, what is the quality of life after a tracheostomy? This is another great question we get very frequently from our readers at IntensiveCareHotline.com, and I do want to shed some light on this question today. I probably should also ask a different question to begin with to set the frame. Is there quality of life in intensive care? The answer is no. Therefore, let's look at some explanations and let's look at the bigger picture. One of the biggest frustrations for families in intensive care is simply that they don't know if a tracheostomy is the right thing to do if their critically ill loved one is on a breathing tube and on a ventilator and can't be weaned off it. From my experience, intensive care units can be very quick to either wanting to do a tracheostomy and then send their patients off to long-term acute care if you are living in the United States. This often serves an intensive care unit because they can free up a precious, expensive, scarce, and in-demand intensive care bed without actually maximizing and optimizing chances to get your critically ill loved one off the ventilator and the breathing tube in the first place. Getting your critically ill loved one off the ventilator and the breathing tube should always be the goal. Most intensive care teams are not explaining this to you and are often trying to, quote unquote, sell you either a tracheostomy as the gold standard without trying to, again, maximize and optimize chances to get your critically ill loved one off the ventilator and the breathing tube in the first place, which should always be the goal. Next, if they don't offer a tracheostomy in the first place, they often want to, quote unquote, sell you and your family on a withdrawal of treatment or on a withdrawal of life support as being, quote unquote, in the best interest for your critically ill loved one. Next, if you are in countries like the UK, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, or South Africa, a tracheostomy should ideally lead to weaning off the ventilator in intensive care. The challenges in those countries is often that there is a delay in suggesting or performing a tracheostomy. That also means a delay in offering or performing a tracheostomy can also be used to again try and quote unquote sell you and your family on a withdrawal of treatment or on a withdrawal of life support as being quote unquote in the best interest for your critically ill loved one. Those facts are really important for you and for your family to understand before I explain to you if there is quality of life with a tracheostomy. Again, I can't stress enough how important it is for you and your family to read between the lines whenever the intensive care team is telling you something. I have also put some links to some articles and videos around when to do a tracheostomy in the first place. You can check those videos and articles out if you scroll down on this video and you go to the written version of the blog, and I put those links in the written version of this blog. And the blog posts and videos are, how long should a patient be on a ventilator before having a tracheostomy? Another article and video is, how long can a breathing tube or an endotracheal tube stay in? And the next title is, what are the risks and benefits of a tracheostomy? Now, if your loved one has a tracheostomy already, you may wonder how long it might take to get off the ventilator and the tracheostomy, and you will find the answer in the blog post and video, Tracheostomy and Weaning off the Ventilator in Intensive Care. How long can it take? Again, there is a link below this video in the written version of this blog. Generally speaking, quality of life after a tracheostomy is improved in intensive care because the need for sedation and induced coma is often minimized or even excluded. You may also be curious to know about why I should be the one answering this question for you. Well, in case you are wondering, after nearly 20 years intensive care nursing in 3 different countries, where I literally worked with thousands of critically ill patients and their families, and where I also worked as a nurse unit manager in intensive care for over 5 years, I can assure you that I've seen my fair share of patients in intensive care getting a tracheostomy. I have also worked in the community with many long-term intensive care patients, adults and children, on ventilators with tracheostomy as part of intensive care at home services. Furthermore, now in my professional one-on-one counselling, consulting and advocacy service here at intensivecarehotline.com, I speak to families in intensive care all over the world every day. I know their questions, I know their frustrations, and I know how to get results for them. Once a tracheostomy has been done, it's also much easier to wean your critically ill loved one off the ventilator, and again, this improves quality of life as well. In some instances, it can also improve quality of end of life too. What a tracheostomy is also doing is it buys your critically ill loved one time, especially when intensive care teams and intensive care doctors are negative. Especially if there is talk about a quote-unquote one-way extubation. So what does a one-way extubation mean? Extubation means the removal of the breathing tube. A one-way extubation means that the doctors or intensive care teams are planning to take your critically ill loved one off the ventilator and the breathing tube, and they won't put the breathing tube back in. It's basically a sink and swim approach, and it doesn't do patients and their families justice. Those one-way extubations are often set up to let people fail, and it's another way for intensive care teams to empty their ICU beds by letting patients die without having tried a tracheostomy. Again, a tracheostomy will buy your critically ill loved one time, and it often buys them as much time as they need to recover in their own time. It's often time that intensive care units are not prepared to give to their patients. They, once again, frame it around your critically ill loved one not having any future quality of life. This is very short-sighted and doesn't take into consideration the time it takes to recover after a critical illness. Therefore, a tracheostomy on the one hand should not be rushed in, but on the other hand it should always be offered. It's as simple as that. The biggest problem, however, is that 99% of the families of critically ill patients in intensive care don't question. They make no informed decisions, they have no peace of mind, no control, no power, and no influence. You are one step ahead of the 99% already, because you are here and you are doing your own research and you are questioning. If your critically ill loved one can be weaned off the ventilator but can't have the tracheostomy removed, they should definitely be in a position to leave intensive care. But even if they can't be weaned off the ventilator, there is light at the end of the tunnel. A ventilator and a tracheostomy is still enabling many patients to go home instead of staying in intensive care or long-term acute care or even a nursing home. The way this is possible is by taking patients home with a service like intensive care at home. Intensive care at home is a genuine alternative to a long-term stay in intensive care, and it literally improves the quality of life for any ventilated and tracheostomized patient overnight. Imagine your loved one is stuck in intensive care or long-term acute care, and your family spends day and night in intensive care or long-term acute care. Intensive care at home offers like a dream come true experience. Go and check out intensivecareathome.com for more information. So therefore the answer is yes, there is quality of life for anybody on a ventilator or tracheostomy. So, how can you become the best advocate for your critically ill loved one? Make informed decisions, get peace of mind, control, power and influence quickly whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. You get to that all-important feeling of making informed decisions, get peace of mind, control, power and influence when you download your free Instant Impact Report now by entering your email below. In your free Instant Impact Report, you learn quickly how to make informed decisions, get peace of mind, real power and real control, and how you can influence decision making fast whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. Your free Instant Impact Report gives you in-depth insight that you must know whilst your loved one is critically ill or is even dying in intensive care. Sign up and download your free Instant Impact Report now by entering your email below. In your free Instant Impact Report, you learn how to speak the secret intensive care language so that the doctors and the nurses know straight away that you are an insider and that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care. In your free report, you will also discover how to ask the doctors and the nurses the right questions. Discover the many competing interests in intensive care and how your critically ill loved one's treatment may depend on those competing interests. How to eliminate fear, frustration, stress, struggle and vulnerability even if your loved one is dying. You get 5 mind-blowing tips and strategies helping you to get on the right path to making informed decisions, get peace of mind, control, power and influence in your situation. You'll get real-world examples that you can easily adapt to your and your critically ill loved one's situation. How to stop being intimidated by the intensive care team and how you will be seen as equals. You'll get crucial behind-the-scenes insight so that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care and how you need to manage doctors and nurses in intensive care, and it's not what you think. Thank you for tuning into this week's Your Questions Answered episode, and I'll see you again next week in another update. Make sure you also check out our blog section for more tips and strategies, or simply send me an email to support@intensivecarehotline.com with your questions. Or you can call me, find international phone numbers on our contacts tab. Also, check out our ebook section where you get more ebooks, videos and audio recordings, and where you can also get one-on-one counseling and consulting with me via Skype over the phone or via email by clicking on the products tab. This is Patrick Hutzel from intensivecarehotline.com, and I'll see you again next week in another update.